Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov is over 800 pages long. Since its publication in 1880, it has functioned as a titanic cultural force, dissected by critics, philosophers, and theologians for over a century. Early psychoanalysts studied it as a primary text. Sigmund Freud ranked it among the greatest works of literature, specifically for its unflinching focus on parricide, the murder of a father by his own son. The book's spiritual reach was equally vast. When Leo Tolstoy died in 1910 at the remote Ostapovo train station, he spent his final hours with a copy of the novel resting on his nightstand. These 800 pages were designed as a mere introduction to a much larger narrative. In his preface, Dostoevsky labeled this the opening to an epic titled The Life of a Great Sinner, a massive cycle he never lived to complete. The strangely unresolved ending of the novel was a deliberate setup for a second volume that never arrived. To see the scale of this loss, we have to look at the draft Dostoevsky left behind. The existing novel reaches its peak during a chaotic trial. The patriarch of the family, Fyodor Karamazov, is dead, and his impulsive eldest son, Dmitri, stands accused of the murder. But the legal proceedings are a farce. We know the illegitimate son Smerdyakov actually committed the crime. Smerdyakov confesses in secret to his brother Ivan, then promptly hangs himself on the eve of the trial, taking the evidence to his grave. Smerdyakov's confession destroys the middle brother, Ivan. Smerdyakov argues that Ivan's own nihilistic philosophy, the idea that without God, everything is permitted, was the direct authorization for the murder. Ivan collapses into brain fever, a 19th-century diagnosis for a total psychosomatic breakdown. With the real killer dead and the primary witness insane, Dmitri is left at the mercy of a newly reformed Russian jury. The legal system of 1864 had introduced secular trials, moving away from spiritual confession towards psychological profiling. Dostoevsky uses this scene to argue that psychology is a stick with two ends. If Dmitri is reckless, he is either too violent to control himself or too honest to hide a murder. One piece of evidence branches into two opposite, equally valid logical conclusions. The jury chooses the darker path and convicts the innocent Dmitri. Dostoevsky used this judicial error to critique the secularization of Russian justice, suggesting that human logic is incapable of perceiving moral reality without a spiritual lens. While the trial tears the family apart, the youngest brother, Alyosha, avoids the courtroom entirely. He is a pure-hearted novice monk who spends the climax of the book befriending a group of schoolboys. The book ends with Alyosha standing at a large stone, delivering a hopeful speech. He urges the children to remember their love for one another as a shield against the cruelty they will face as adults. It seems like an oddly gentle conclusion to a saga of parricide and madness, but the archival notes of Dostoevsky's confidant, A.S. Suvorin, reveal that this sweetness was intended to be temporary. Suvorin's diary details a planned time jump for the second volume. Dostoevsky intended to move the story roughly 15 years into the future, landing in the height of the Russian revolutionary terror of the late 1870s. In this sequel, Alyosha was destined to lose his faith. He would seek out the Narodnaya Volya, the revolutionary terrorists of the era, and attempt to assassinate the Russian Tsar. This path of political violence had a definitive conclusion. Alyosha, the hero of the first book, would eventually be arrested and executed for his crimes. This unwritten trajectory recontextualizes the entire first book. Alyosha's purity at the stone isn't a resolution, it is the moral high ground Dostoevsky established before plunging his hero into political extremism. Just months after completing the first book, the story stopped. In January 1881, Dostoevsky suffered a fatal lung hemorrhage. He died before he could write a single word of the sequel. On his deathbed, Dostoevsky asked his wife Anna to bring him his New Testament. This was the same physical copy he had kept with him for 4 years in a Siberian labor camp 3 decades earlier. He opened the book at random to Matthew 3:14, which contains the phrase, "Suffer it to be so now." Dostoevsky took the verse as a sign that his work was finished. He accepted the necessity of his death and passed away that evening. The reaction was unprecedented. 30,000 people followed his coffin through St. Petersburg. For one afternoon, radicals and priests, workers and aristocrats, all walked in a unified procession. The theorist Mikhail Bakhtin later argued that Dostoevsky's work is defined by polyphony. Polyphony is a technique where characters are treated as independent voices rather than puppets of the author, allowing competing worldviews to exist without a final, forced resolution. Because Dostoevsky died when he did, the dark sequel disappeared. Alyosha never became a terrorist. The first book's ending was permanently locked into place by the author's sudden death. This historical accident froze the speech at the stone in place. Because the dark sequel vanished, the novel remains an unfinalized polyphonic masterpiece, one that offers no neat answers to human evil, but suggests that love can survive cruelty.